Okay, I believe the embargo has just lifted on the fall economic statement because it was tabled inside the House of Commons. Again, Chrystia Freeland, supposed to be doing this at this hour, but she quit as Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister earlier this morning. Here to give us a sense of what is inside that document is Peter Armstrong, CBC's senior business reporter, who's expecting a very different day today, Peter. But you had a little over 2 hours to get through this. Tell us what's inside in terms of spending and deficit.
Yeah, look, we're having a day here. The big shiny bauble out of all of this is the deficit numbers. We knew that coming in. The number has come in at $61.9 billion deficit for last year. And that's an important caveat here because they're kind of taking a bunch of charges and putting them against last year's books. The actual deficit for this coming year is $42.8 billion. So all of those charges, that $61.9 billion, are a collection of things that they've sort of added up and put onto the books as one-time charges from last year. This is carryover from COVID payments, a bunch of Indigenous lawsuits that have all sort of had to be added onto the books as a one-time payment, and they don't carry on going forward. You can see the deficit numbers going right through what used to be fiscal anchors and then were guidelines and are now vague ideas. We're going to see a $42.8 billion deficit for 24-25. That goes to 37.4, all the way down to 18.7 on the horizon here. That's in 2029, 2030. And there's four kind of main pillars of spending, if you will, Rosemary. The first one is just stuff they've announced since the budget, and that's like $2.2 billion. You can skip ahead to about $1.3 billion on the border, on broader safety measures. A lot of that, though, of course, are border concerns. There's $3.2 billion in reducing everyday costs. That, of course, is mostly the GST promise, the tax break that will be in place for 2 months from December through to mid-February. But the biggest part of this, if there's $23 billion in spending over the next 5 years, 18.5 of that is in what's called investing to raise wages. And the vast majority of that, $17.5 billion, is on a program that Bill Morneau introduced back in, I think it was 2017, the Accelerated Investment Incentive. And what that is effectively a tax program that allows businesses that invest in property or in business or in machinery, whatever have you, they can write that down more quickly and more smoothly. So if there's $23 billion outside of that big $61.9 billion deficit for last year, looking ahead over the next 5 years, we've got $23 billion in new spending. 17.5 of that is for that one program that's really just an extension of something Bill Morneau introduced.
Okay, I just want to recap a little bit because I had also heard that it was a child welfare court settlement to correct some of the things that have happened to Indigenous children in this country, to make sure that doesn't happen again, so that one-time payout was going to be in the budget. I did not, though, understand, and I don't think, given David's face, he did either, that the budget from last year would blow by what the guardrail was. Chrystia Freeland had said that deficit was going to stay at $40 or $41 billion. So that is a surprise to me
were it not for all of those one-time charges, a lot of them, as you say, these lawsuits against the government from Indigenous communities, carry over from COVID. I'm not entirely sure in reading it that the child tax benefit stuff is actually included in that. But of that $20.1 billion, all of that is just this one-time tax filing charge. They're calling it an accounting problem, that they had to put it all on 1 year's books and weren't going to be able to carry it over going forward.
What does the document say, Peter, about economic growth and sort of the state of the government's finances in terms of what they have on hand or not?
So this is a little bit more sort of my bailiwick, the stuff that I follow every day. And it was interesting to me in reading it. They build these on a consensus of private sector forecasts that sort of come together and say, this is what we think is going to happen in the economy. And then the government extrapolates that and says, okay, well, we'll take that as our baseline and we'll have an upside scenario where things come in better than expected and a downside scenario where things come in weaker than expected. And they're all within a fairly tight margin, Rosemary. They say the downside scenario would lead to about $6 billion in higher deficit every year over the budgeting horizon. But it's not like they're really factoring in what would happen if Donald Trump goes ahead with a 25% tariffs. They haven't updated that forecast since Donald Trump made that threat. And so we don't really know what the books would look like if we end up in an all-out trade war, which is increasingly a likely scenario. It does have some look at what would happen if there were some tariffs on some things, but there isn't the sort of downside scenario if things go sour right now. And I think everybody listening to this has a sense in their head of what things would look like if things went sour. There's no real sense in this document of what that would look like, what impact that would have on the books, because as we all know, the impact of that would be devastating. It would be multiple points of GST dropping, GDP dropping. It would be an unemployment rate going through the roof. It would be interest rates going higher to try to offset the lower dollar. It would be a catastrophe for the Canadian economy, and it's really not factored in as something they're exploring of what would happen to the government books if that did happen.
I'm just noticing from our online story here, Peter, that Sahir Khan, who was on my show yesterday, was supposed to be on this special right now, did say that it's the first time, in his view, that we've seen the government pivot from a consumption-oriented wealth redistribution budget to one that's investment-focused. So tell me what he means by that, and would that not address some of the things that Donald Trump is threatening?
Absolutely. And if you look at it from a tax competitive question, this is something that, you talk to economists that have been calling for Canada to get its act together on a tax competitive front. This is something they've wanted to see. This is a program that came in 2017 to make it easier for businesses to invest, right? If you want to build a new factory, or if you want to add a new warehouse at the back of your factory, or buy a new fleet of trucks, or whatever it may be, you can write down that investment faster. So it should induce more investment into the economy, which is a net good. I was talking to Pedro Antunes about it. He said, look, I'm going to like it, but Armin Yalnizyan, who is sitting at the table with us, probably won't. And I think that's a fair assessment of sort of where they're at, that the more sort of business side of this would find that a really good program and something that would address the tax competitive problem that we do have, Donald Trump notwithstanding. It's just something that he's been pushing for. And it's a program that I think a lot of Canadian businesses have taken advantage of, and extending it out over the horizon would do good things for business investment in this country. And
just to be clear, and I think we know this, but the rebate checks, the workers' rebate check, that is not in this document at all.
Yeah, we asked about that at the briefing, and we were told there is no reference to that document in the FES. So it didn't end up here, and that is obviously part of the drama that led to all of the stuff that has happened. On this very busy day, on a day where I like to dig through these things, the actual FES itself is frankly the least interesting thing that has happened here in the lockup all day, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Okay, Peter Armstrong, thank you. We will come back to you, I'm sure, but thank you for giving us a first glance at a document that has caused a whole lot of problems today in this town. Appreciate you being here. I will say on the border, Peter Armstrong rightly pointed out that $1.3 billion will be given to a border security package. However, our notes here also point out that only $600 million is in new spending, and it doesn't really give a clear picture of where that money is going. I'm sure that will be of much interest to the provinces. But of course, the big numbers there. Well, that's the border number, but the other big number that you're hearing about is the size of the deficit for last year, which is largely attributed to a court settlement that had to be done to deal with Indigenous child welfare. That is a one-time cost, but it does mean that the guardrail that Chrystia Freeland had set for herself of $40 or $41 billion last fiscal has been blown past, though it does look as though the deficit, as you can see there, goes on a downward trend into the future, provided the government stays on this path.